And welcome back, everybody, to another installment of the Adventures with Sarah stroll through Florence today. I wasn't supposed to be here, you guys. I should have been home days ago, but I'm having so much fun showing you guys around. This was absolutely not intentional. I came here for personal reasons. I had a personal thing I needed to do in Italy, but I thought, well, I'm here. This is an opportunity without any crowds to show you guys around Italy a little bit. So I hope you're having a good time with all of my travels and my virtual tours, because I think as tour guides we really need to figure out how to bring travel to you. And something interesting in my mind is this could be something for the future too, because some people after this may not be able to travel again. So as tour guides, I'm excited about us coming up with new techniques to share our love of travel and our knowledge. So who knows, maybe this will continue and persist beyond this pandemic situation. So thank you for all of your support. And please, if you aren't a subscriber yet, I would love to have you as a Patreon subscriber. Encourage me to keep doing crazy, crazy things because this is my job now. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to continue our walk through Florence today, and I'm going to hit a couple of the biggies here before I tune out and go eat myself a steak. So I am here now to show you a little bit about Renaissance art, a snapshot of it during the 1400s. Now, at the very beginning of the Renaissance, let's go back a little bit. So, Roman art we know was beautiful and wonderful and everything and magical, but art declines even in the time of the Romans. By about 300, when the Romans moved to Byzantium, art had declined quite a lot, actually, and the Dark Ages, I guess you want to call it, or the Middle Ages begin. And really, why is it that art is not great then? It's because people don't have money. They can't spend. If you don't have enough money to pay for food, why would you pay for art? And people are so afraid during that time, especially in the run-up to the turn of the millennium. Remember how crazy we all went for Y2K? Like, imagine medieval people with a lot less education. The year 1000 was terrifying for them. So there wasn't a lot of economic activity during that time period, and people were really, it was rough. And of course, you're not going to create great art when you're concerned about surviving. So after the year 1000, that's when people sort of start to get a little optimistic, like, oh, I guess Jesus isn't coming. So let's just keep this party going and let's try to build. And there's a big economic boom after the turn of the millennium. And that's when things really start to turn around for Europe. There's a variety of reasons. I'm being very simplistic, but things start to happen here. So starting in the 1100s, especially in central Italy, trade routes open up, businesses begin, these city-states start to produce products that people want to pay for. One of the most important products is fabric. Now, I know that you guys think that fabric isn't worth anything. You know, I can go to Joanne Fabrics and make these masks for you guys, and I can buy, 10 yards for $10 or whatever. But if you go back to the 1100s, fabric was outrageously expensive. It was usually made of silk or wool. Cotton was not a thing yet. And it was something that was hard to come by. So clothing said a lot about your status because the fabric itself, the material to make the clothing, was so incredibly valuable. So if you can imagine, think of all those images of princesses and kings and these huge, lots of fabric. And the reason they did that is that was showing their wealth. A gown from, let's say, the Renaissance on a fine lady in today's dollars could have been $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. So there was a reason that the dowry was full of clothing. Clothing had a value. That fabric was so, so expensive. And that's where the areas of central Italy hit the jackpot for two reasons. They have sheep, and those sheep have really long fibers, and they make a really fine quality of wool that you can't get anywhere else. It's particular to this region of Europe. That's number one. Number two, here in Florence, they figured out how to dye amazing colors that nobody else had. And part of that has to do with the minerals around here. This is a volcanic area. There's a lot of interesting minerals. You've seen all the beautiful marble colors around here, but the reason they have those is that the hills are completely covered with interesting minerals. You crush those minerals, and you can use those as dyes, different kinds of dyes, to make beautiful colored fabric. And the other missing piece there is alum. Alum is the thing that fixes those colors into the fabric fibers. Alum just happens to be something that they have in abundance in Tuscany near Volterra. They had this very specific fixative. So they could have more vibrant colors here in Tuscany than they could have anywhere else. So if you really want to get to the heart of why here, why were the Medici here? Why is there so much art here? Why were they so wealthy? It's all about clothes, man. People want to look pretty. And back then, that was your status symbol, having nice clothes, and they made the best fabric. So this is the origin of why it's not just Florence. Siena, that was a little different story, but Lucca, the town my other son is named after, was famous for the silk trade. This is the reason. So fabrics. So these cities become very wealthy off of those. And when we get to the 1300s, people have extra money, and what are they going to spend it on? Also, there's a lot of competition. If you've ever met any Italians before, they're kind of competitive. So between all of these different families that were running the cities, they were competitive politically, but also economically. And so the different trade unions, too, would get together and compete. And trade unions, guilds, were very, very important to the life of medieval cities, leading into the Renaissance, and even beyond. Because the trade unions, that's how the individual artisan had power. So the only way you can compete with the families like the Strozzi or the Medici or whatever in political power terms, if you're just you, is by being a part of a guild. So at the beginning of the 1400s, we have here the beginning of great wealth, and they're decorating the city because they want to celebrate that and they want to show other people how glorious their beautiful city is. So I want to show you kind of an interesting snapshot of the quality of art they were able to do at that time. And that's at a very strange place. This is the Orsanmichele. I'm going to show you how tall this building is. If you've ever been to Florence, if you see the skyline, this is almost as dominant in the skyline as the Duomo because it's super tall. Now, you look at it and you say, well, obviously that's a church. Yes, that's correct. But it wasn't a church originally. It was never built to be a church. And let me see if I can get a better view so you can understand it. It's just a big square. It doesn't look like a church. It's not an elegant building. And you see these funny panels here. Now, I told you what a loggia is, right? So if you remove these panels, you can tell this is a loggia. This is an open market space. It's a market area. So there was a market here in the past. So what kind of a building would you put over a market? You're going to put stuff you can sell in the market. This is the granary. This is the granary of the city of Florence. This is where they stored all of their grain. What they would do is they would sell it here, but then the columns that you can see over here would have a chute at the bottom. The grain would be right up above here, and they'd open the chute, and it would come down. You could fill your sack, and it would be sold there. Now, this is a granary on steroids. Seriously, no city in Italy that I know of had a granary quite this big. The reason the Florentines built it is because back in the olden days, the cities hated each other, Siena and Florence in particular, but many other cities, they fought against each other, attacked each other, trying to gain advantage and territory and all of this because they were individual countries. The type of wars, though, were not what you think. It wasn't bloody wars because the thing is that all of the soldiers were mercenaries. You had to pay for these condottieri, these elegant gentlemen who were also soldiers. You'd say, hey, can you please go attack Siena? We hate Siena. They would pay for this war. It wasn't a war where they'd storm the gates of the city, though. It was siege warfare. So what they do is these guys would get together their soldiers, they'd go over to Siena, and they'd sit and just occupy the outside of the city and not let anything come or go. They would sit and wait. Now, the opposing general, who was hired by the other town, they were usually friends, or they knew at least the guy who was fighting against them. They'd come out and they'd make a deal and say, okay, how much are you being paid? Well, here's how much I'm being paid. How much can you bribe me? And that's how they decide a lot of these battles. And in fact, a lot of people who were soldiers during the Renaissance and the Middle Ages didn't die from being stabbed during battle. They died of malaria, of starvation. They died because they got cut in battle and it turned to gangrene. So it's kind of a funny situation of what battle was and what warfare was back then. It was economic warfare above all. So how does a city whose economy is everything fight against that threat? They build the world's largest granary because you can sit within your city walls as long as you want, as long as you've got enough food and water for everybody inside. And that's what the Florentines did. So this was the purpose of this enormous building. Now later on, Florence is going to become the undisputed master of Tuscany. Sorry, Siena. And especially after 1348, it's over for the rest of Tuscany. Florence has won. They don't need a granary like this. This is crazy. So instead, they do exactly the thing that seems obvious. They turn it into a church, of course. Why wouldn't you turn a granary into a church? That totally makes sense, right? Okay, but it made sense to them. But it doesn't look anything like a church. So what they did is they asked the guilds of the city to please decorate it to make it look pretty. And they turned it into sort of a competition between the guilds to see who could create the most beautiful niches. But they had a very short amount of time. It was something like, I think, 8 years. You had to fill your niche, right? And if you didn't, a different guild would get it. So what's cool is that each of these individual niches is a snapshot of what art was in the beginning of the 1400s. So we can compare. And it's cool because the 1400 more or less, was a turning point in art from that international Gothic style that's very stiff into something new, which is the Renaissance. So here's what we're going to have a look at to start. So this is Four Saints, and this is a style that I would pretty much put into the very early Renaissance or even late Gothic style, because if you look, those people are very stiff. I don't know who they are. They could be anybody. They have no expression. They're just kind of standing there. They're not elegant or gentle looking. They're just people standing there. And that lack of expression, that lack of movement, that's really what art was like at the beginning of the 1400s. You can see who paid for this. This is the fun part, is if you look below, this is what it's all about. It's about the advertising. So, this guild paid for this art. And so they want to make sure that you know that. And who was this guild? You can tell it is the sculptors, the masons. They're building walls, they're carving columns. It looks like they're about to murder a baby, but that's actually a sculpture. So this is their billboard. It's their Nike swoosh. So we walk by and say, oh yeah, okay, they paid for that. I think it's kind of interesting that for this masons, that they have one of the least impressive niches. Here's the most impressive one in my personal view. This is my favorite Donatello. So instead of 3 or 4 individual saints who have no expression, this guild hired Donatello at the beginning of the 1400s. Donatello was an interesting guy. He was friends with Brunelleschi, who was the one who did the Dome of St. Peter's. Now, when Brunelleschi goes to do the Dome of the Duomo. When Brunelleschi goes to do the dome of the Duomo, he wants to propose the project. He didn't know how to do it. There was no, method for making a dome as large as they needed to make. So Donatello, this artist here, and Brunelleschi went to Rome. They go to Rome and they do excavations. The story goes that they actually went to the Pantheon and dug a hole in the wall to try and figure out what the Pantheon was made out of. But they came up with nothing because the Pantheon was made of concrete. And people in the 1400s had no idea what concrete was. That had disappeared long ago. So in their explorations, Donatello was studying the excavations and the ancient Roman art that they were finding all the time. And you can tell, because have a look at the way his St. George is standing. He's standing in what's called contrapposto. Contrapposto is the way you're probably standing. If you're listening to me right now washing dishes in your kitchen, you're standing on one leg, aren't you? I know you are. If you're standing up, all of your weight is on one of your legs. You almost certainly are not standing with your weight equally on both legs. Come on, admit it. I know it's true. And that's what contrapposto is. It's the natural way that we stand that is unnatural in your imagination. You think we stand equally on both legs, but we definitely don't. So this is something he discovered. Oh, contrapposto, look, if I actually sculpt people who are standing, putting more weight on one leg than the other, it looks more natural. But then he goes beyond that, because what I want you to notice is, look how intense he is. Look at the way he looks out at the world. Look at that face. He's got something on his mind, and you want to know what it is. I want to know what it is, right? So there's a psychological tension and power just in his gesture and in his face that you don't see in the previous work I showed you, which is contemporary. So Donatello just knows how to do something naturalistic. Look at the fist. Oh, I love that zooming in with the camera, because these are just details that with a naked eye you don't necessarily catch. But look at that fist. Look at that. That's determination just in that fist, and the elegance of the hand on top of it. There's just something, and look at how determined he is. I want to know what's on this guy's mind. So that's psychological art. And that's the thing that Michelangelo is going to become really well known for, but Donatello's doing it 100 years earlier. So this is the magic of Donatello. Yeah, this is my Renaissance boyfriend. He is the great genius. And look at this guy. He looks like he's about to just step off of this shelf and go out and do the thing he needs to do. And what is the thing he needs to do? It's in this story right here. He's St. George. So he's about to go and slay the dragon. And of course, we also have our advertisement. This Donatello is being brought to you by the armorists. Look at that. This year's elegant line of chainmail, the year August 1400, you know. This is their advertisement for their product. The armorists. So this is my favorite niche here. Donatello is exceptional in so many ways, but just being a visionary about what art can be. Now, at the same time, there was another genius working, and I just want you to, check me here, because what I don't love is when historians and tour guides tell you what to like. And I'm totally doing what I say I don't like. I tell you what I like because I think it's genius, but I want you to check my work because there's another great here. And the other great here is Ghiberti. He's the one who did the great doors of the Baptistry in front of the cathedral. And Ghiberti is absolutely a great artist, but I'm not sure he's a great large-scale sculptor, and he's definitely not in the same league as Donatello. So have a look at his entry, same time frame. And for me, I look at this and I think, well, I mean, it's really good. It's better than the Four Saints for sure, but it's very stiff. You know, I don't wonder what's going on in this guy's head. He does have the contrapposto, that's for sure, but there's something human about the energy that Donatello puts into what he does. I am going to kind of go down here and show you one more. And yeah, there's just so much conflict and tension and gentleness and sweetness and everything in Donatello's work that you just don't see in other people's work. There's a lot of contrast. This is another one I just want to quickly touch on because remember I talked about the advertising? Who paid for this one, huh? They're doing their work right now. They're telling you what they do. It's the guys who put the horseshoes on, and look, there's their Nike swoosh. Those are the clamps that they use to put the horseshoes on. Okay, so one more Donatello, because you should love him. I hope you do. But you don't have to. This is St. Mark. And this is a funny one because you may look at it and go, yeah, I'm not impressed. And I know from first glance it's not as good as St. George. St. George is really a masterpiece. But what's interesting about this one is that Donatello was really a person who was experimental. And it didn't always work, but he tried. So the story goes on this one that he was playing with perspective. And he was trying to work with statues that were going to be seen from a distance and from down below. So when he did this one, apparently they say that the guild that commissioned it, they went and they looked at it and they thought it was terrible because what they saw was this. I'm going to try and, if I zoom from here, you'll probably be able to see it. Now, if you look at it from here, look how distorted the body is. The head is too long. The neck is too long. It's not quite right. It looks just awkward, right? So apparently what he did is he tried to correct for the position that people would be seeing the statue in by elongating things, because when you see something up above you, it's foreshortened in your vision when you see it. So he's playing with this concept of foreshortening that's going to become very popular 200, 300 years later, but he's way ahead of his time. He's sculpting and foreshortening. So it looks super awkward here, but let's go underneath it and look up. And now look at that. It looks good. The proportions have totally changed. He knew that if he elongated the neck, then when you looked at it from underneath, the proportions would be more correct. So look at just the beautiful fine details with all of the drapery. And the face, I think, is also very nice. The way the head is just slightly tilted. So there's a softness and a gentility, but also a harshness and an energy. It's just, I don't know. For me, Donatello is just such an exciting sculptor because he's adding all these different elements, and it's just there's a chaos, a beautiful chaos to it, but also such a genius. So just to, again, check my work, that Donatello's as awesome as I think he is, let's check my work with another contemporary. This is another one from the same time frame. All right, so I don't know, what do you think? I'm going to say I don't think that this one wins, and I am sorry to be kind of disrespectful, but I often think of, if you ever saw that movie in the 80s that was the horror story where the doll comes alive, Chucky, and he, like, you know, the evil baby doll. I don't know. The expression on that baby Jesus' face is kind of alarming. But this is the same time frame, but this artist is clearly stuck in the distant past, right? All right. So I think it's Donatello for the win. One last thought before we walk away. There were other artists working in later years that did add, and one of them I think that's kind of interesting is Verrocchio. Verrocchio was the teacher of a very famous artist, and I want you to guess which one it is, and I think you're going to be able to tell it immediately. Verrocchio was a master sculptor and painter, but he was bested in painting by his student who was only 12 or 13 years old, and he gave up painting and he never did it again, which is like so Italian. So have a look. Look at the faces here. Now, if you just look at the faces, this is Verrocchio, but look at the faces. Now, take a heartbeat and think, where have you seen faces like that before in paintings? You've seen them before, somebody very famous. Come on, give me a guess. Who was the student of Verrocchio? 12 years old, was such a genius that his master stopped forever painting and then later became actually a very good sculptor. It was Da Vinci. It was Leonardo da Vinci. So imagine having a 12 or 13-year-old show up on Adventures with Sarah and be a much better tour guide than me. I think I'd probably give up my profession too. Actually, my 13-year-old probably could do a better tour than me. Nico probably could best me at a lot of things. So, va bene. All right, so thanks for sticking with me, everybody. I'm going to stroll up via Calzaioli and up to the Duomo and then I'm getting a little tired, I have to admit. And I do have a big day for you guys tomorrow, so I don't want to stay out too late. So just a few more minutes and just a real quick talk about the Duomo. And then I'm going to go get my bistecca alla Fiorentina, which is, I think, the best thing ever. So if you'd like to support my work, go ahead and give me a virtual tip or support me on Patreon and buy me a bottle of wine because I need a glass of wine, people. I'm tired. Look how strange this is. I mean, for a Friday night in September, this is via Calzaioli, the main street. Nobody. Empty hotels, restaurants that are closed. It's super duper duper weird, but it is what it is. Via Calzaioli is the name of the street, and it means the street of the stocking makers. But those were stockings not made for women, but for men. Because men in the past used to wear stockings with tunics over the top. Excuse me. Lots of teenagers with no manners. And this is Piazza della Repubblica down here. Corona's Cafe. I think I'm going to avoid going in there. All right, and now we're going to go back up to the Duomo. Now, the food in Florence is one of the great things. We did a food tour earlier today with my friend Coral Sisk, but dinner is different than cheeses or meats or all of that. So dinner means steak for me here in Florence. Bistecca alla Fiorentina is the specialty. They have a very special meat called chianina beef. It's white cows. They're really beautiful. And they make a good steak. And the way they sell a Fiorentina here is by the kilo, 2.2 pounds. Now, unfortunately, I'm by myself, so I don't think I can get a Fiorentina. It's just too much steak. But often if I have a friend with me, I will, especially, one with a big appetite, I'm happy to share a Fiorentina and some spinach, which is the other thing that Florentines are really known for, is the spinach. This time of year, there's not a lot of spinach. Everybody's serving cicoria right now, so I don't know that I'll get my spinaci, but we'll give it a shot. Washed down with a nice bold red wine. Here in Tuscany, we have too many to choose from. We have the Brunello, we have the Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, but we also have the cheap ones, cheaper version of the elegant ones, which is the Rosso di Montalcino. and the Rosso di Montepulciano. So you can get sort of a high-class wine at a bargain price if you get the Rosso rather than the nice one. All right, here we go. Without further ado, the Queen of the City, Santa Maria degli Fiori, Saint Mary of the Flowers, otherwise known as the Duomo. Oh, look how beautiful. Here we are. Oh, it looks like there's people on top of the Duomo. Huh. I wonder if they're still open. Sorry guys, but I'm not going to go up there tonight. If you want to see what going to the top of the Duomo is like, go hit up my YouTube channel. I made a video of climbing it because it was, that was enough work. I'm not in it for that tonight. But if you want to see it, you can check my YouTube channel for the climb to the top of the Duomo. So, what do I have to say about the Duomo? There's too much, but I just want to really quickly summarize for you the story. So, this church was started in the 1290s, I believe, by Arnolfo da Cambio. So originally, this should have been a church that was much smaller. Okay, so if you take a look at the way the church, the patterning on the side of the church goes, watch how at a certain point the rhythm sort of changes, right? So we have the church here, and then when we get to this wall here, something changes. That's because this whole part here was a later addition, so they made it incredibly large. The dome itself, with the church, the height is incredible. When compared to other churches, it's one of the largest churches in the world, dome-wise. But it's different than other domes that you've seen before because it's not like the Pantheon. It's not a sphere. It's like an egg shape, essentially. The story goes that this church was built with a big hole in the middle. So built like a cross, but with a big hole in the middle. And the architect who originally designed the plan didn't have a plan for how to cover that space. He sort of had a thought about it, but really he left it to later architects to solve this engineering problem. How do you span that big of a distance? It's a huge distance. That was left to the future. So 100 years later, a little bit more than that, the city of Florence needed to cover it because, of course, you can't have Mass in the open air forever. So they had a competition, and they asked for suggestions. So during that time, there were multiple people that submitted ideas, and the two most important ones were Ghiberti and Brunelleschi. Now, they had been in a competition previously for the doors of the Baptistry, and Brunelleschi had lost. Ghiberti had won. Being an Italian, when you lose a competition, what do? You give up sculpting and you never do it again. And he ran off to Rome with our friend Donatello and studied the Pantheon and tried to figure out how are we going to cover this space in the center of the church. So he came up with an idea, and the idea was an egg. Now, have you ever taken an egg out of your refrigerator? Go take an egg out of your refrigerator and take it and try to crush it at the apex. You can't because it's such a strong shape. So that was his idea, that if we use a shape like that, the load is going to be easy to transfer, and it's going to be a very solid and, it's going to be something that will last forever. But it's not just one dome, it's two. They built one dome inside of the other, and they're locked together, the two domes, by stone chains. So the domes essentially rest on each other and hold each other up. So if you can imagine, inside that building, there's another dome on the inside, and then the stairs to the top run around the inside of that space, okay? So when Brunelleschi got the project, they had built up to this brown part right here, and then from there he built his dome on the top of that. But the most important thing of the story, I think, is not just how he built it, and it's made of bricks, there's all kinds of technical details. The most important technical detail is look how high that is, and look at how modern day scaffolding looks ridiculous. What that means is that he could have never done a system of scaffolding. It needed to have an ingenious scaffolding system. So what they did was he designed a system of suspended scaffolding on the inside. So on the inside of the dome here, they built a platform that went in a circle all the way around, and then they built an elevator, basically, with donkeys that would walk in a circle, and they could send bricks and things like that up. So they'd build, and once they got to a certain height, they'd move the scaffolding up another level, and then keep going. So it's the methods of its construction that I think are almost more extraordinary than the final product, because we're talking about 600 years ago. It's pretty impressive. If we look at this bell tower here, this is the Campanile of Giotto. This was done quite a bit before. Remember, Giotto dies in 1347. But the striking thing for this whole church, visually, other than the dome and the architecture, is the color. You see it's red, white, and green. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's like pizza, tomato, mozzarella, and basil. But no, the red, white, and green are something else. They are colors of the cardinal virtues of the church, which are faith, hope, and charity. And this tells you a little bit of something about how our modern eyes can't read things. We can't read what the intention of art and architecture is. And that's why having a tour guide or somebody else to talk to you about it is important, because we're blind. We don't see the things. If you were a pilgrim and you had come here and you had seen this in the year 1500, you would have said, oh yeah, that's faith, hope, and charity. I understand. You would have been able to look at all of these symbols and understand what they mean. You wouldn't need somebody to interpret it. So, the past is a foreign country, You have to have somebody help you understand it. So, I want to point out just one thing. This is Giotto's tower, but there's a very important, not very important, but there's a sculpture I like, because this is a Donatello. You can see that there are different sculptures of people here, saints that are done by Donatello, but this one here is my favorite. Again, remember, he was playing with that perspective, and that paid off later when he was able to do sculptures like this that were seen from a great distance. That one they call Zuccone, the pumpkin head, because he's bald, which I think is really funny, because Italians love to give people and things funny nicknames. But there's lots of interesting little sculptures on this of different trades. And then over here, we have the facade of the Duomo. And something to note about this is really beautiful. Of course, you're going to love it. And you come and you think, oh, how glorious, how beautiful, how elegant, and how old. Not old at all. Wrong. This facade was done in the 19th century. So when I mentioned that Florence became the capital of Italy in the 1870s, what they did is they came to the city and went, oh my gosh, we're going to make this the capital. But on the other hand, this city is a mess. This church was only half done from the facade. The facade only went up yay high, and they never finished the whole thing. So they needed to quickly come up with a new design, tear down the old facade, and put up one that would be worthy of a city that is the capital of the new country of Italy. I've actually heard they spent so much money during the renovation and restoration of the city in the 1870s that they were in debt until well after World War II. But this is Victorian. I mean, it's beautiful, sure, but it's new. It's Victorian. On the other hand, we have something over here that is very old. This building is the Baptistry, and it's much, much older than the Duomo. This comes before, and it actually has Roman origins. They think that this baptistry is actually something that was, in the past, a Roman temple. Ooh, I think they're doing a mass. Let's go over and see. I'm hearing music. Where am I hearing music from? Maybe I'm wrong. Oh my gosh, we have so few tourists. I can actually show you something. It's dark. Would you like to look at the Gates of Paradise with me? So I'm going to attempt to show you because it's a little dark. This is one of the most important works in the entire city. These are called the Gates of Paradise. Yeah, we can see them. Okay, I wasn't going to talk about them because I thought it was too dark, but hey, look, we can see them. So, va bene, let's talk a little bit about this. The Baptistry was one of the most important buildings in the city of Florence because this is where everybody was baptized. So if you were Florentine and you needed to be baptized, one day a year, everybody would come to the Baptistry, and it was like full immersion. You'd walk down and you'd get baptized. So, something to know though, the baptismal font is not in the church. I was baptized in a church, in a Catholic church, but I was baptized in the church, inside. Here, the Baptistry is a different building, and that's true all over Italy, and that is because back in the Renaissance and before, you couldn't go in the church if you were not baptized. Actually, some churches that I've seen from the Middle Ages have porches that are intended for you to stand on if you're not baptized or if you have not gone to confession. So they're pretty hard. So you had to go through here first, and then these doors, they call them the Gates of Paradise because when you were baptized, they would open these glorious doors, and then you would be able to go from here the newly baptized person across the Piazza of Paradise into the church for the first time. So that's why these are the most important set of doors in Florence. So what I want to quickly show you, just hang with me for a sec. I want to show you a really super fast forward view of what Renaissance art is and what is the evolution. What does it mean and what does it matter? We talk about the Renaissance in Florence, and I know it gets a little much, like what does it mean? Who cares? What it is that it's a development of art that took place so incredibly rapidly that it's shocking. And it was shocking to the people back then. We're used to progress happening really fast. I remember when I got a microwave when I was a teenager, like that was a huge, huge big deal. And iPhones, I mean, come on, think about it. Like we're used to progress at a breakneck speed. People in Florence had not seen progress ever, really. I mean, this was the first time. And progress was happening at a breakneck speed here. And the progress they saw was art. So let's start here with the first set of doors to the Baptistry. These were done by the Pisanos. And we're talking about, oh gosh, I want to say these were the 1300s. Please don't quote me. I can't remember because I'm an out-of-work tour guide who's rusty. So this set of doors was done first. What was remarkable about this set of doors, they were done by the Pisanos. The Pisanos were in Pisa, obviously, but Pisa had a very special thing that they could do. They could make bronze doors. And I know that doesn't sound impressive, but back in the 12 and 13 and 1400s, most bronze doors came from Constantinople. Because until the mid-1400s, Constantinople was still kind of the capital, the New York City of the Western world. So if you wanted bronze doors, you had to order them there. This family, the Pisanos, started making bronze doors using a bas-relief technique like this, casting these panels. So these doors were great for their era. But let's just be honest. They're like Barbie dolls pasted on a background, right? You don't know, I mean, you have to see written behind them what the name of the saint is, because how would you know otherwise? I mean, they're a huge leap forward from previous attempts, but they're not a full scene, shall we say. Okay, so take a picture. They're great, they're beautiful. Take a picture. All right, now I'm going to show you the next evolution. Early 1400s, we have that competition I mentioned between Ghiberti and Brunelleschi for the doors of the Baptistry. And they're given that quadrifoil shape, each artist, to cast their first panel as a sample panel. So both artists cast a sample panel, and then they judge and they decide which one is more liked. One of the many stories I've heard is that Ghiberti was just a more well-liked person. And so I personally, when you look at the two panels, they're in the Bargello, you can see them and you can make your own choice which one you think was better. I think I like the Brunelleschi one better. Doesn't matter, he lost. For our good fortune, actually, because in that way he ended up dropping sculpture and going and becoming an architect. But Ghiberti decided to dedicate 20 years of his life to developing these panels. And he makes a big leap. Okay, so go back to that snapshot in your head. You have the panel, the saint sitting there very stiffly. Here's what comes next. These are the first panels, the first doors done by Ghiberti. Now let's take a look at what's different. This panel here I think is a great one because look how many characters there are. And look how far away the casting goes. So there's a super depth to it. So this bas-relief technique, we haven't seen this quality of work since ancient Rome. If you ever have been to the Arch of Titus in the Roman Forum, this is the same quality. It's 1,400 years later practically, but it's the same quality. It's taken a long time for humanity to catch up with the glory of ancient Rome, and now we're doing it. Not only is there a nice depth and there's a bunch of different characters and there's a scene, you can understand a story. You know, you can see in each of these that there is something going on. It's not just representational, but these are dramatic stories. Each panel tells a different story. I also love that there's architecture. If you look, you can see here how there's architecture jutting out to frame the action. So it really draws you in, and it looks like you're seeing a photograph, a snapshot from each of these stories. Now Ghiberti knew that he was good, and he was so good that he wrote his name right across here at eye level, saying that he did this. Of course he did. This one here, this is a great panel as an example of storytelling. This is the Annunciation. And you can always tell an Annunciation because look at the gesture of Mary's hand. That gesture that she's making with her hand is always the gesture you see in Annunciations where the angel says, yep, you're pregnant. And she's saying, what? Me? But they always have that demure sort of arch of the body and the hand gesture, and then the angels assisting the announcement. But there's a story there, and you can really tell that there's the feeling of a story. They say that this, I think, is that is the portrait of the master who did the first set of doors. These guys really were proud of themselves, so they definitely signed their own work. Okay, so that's a nice evolution, and that's a huge step. 20 years, more or less, he worked on those. Then he gets the commission for the Gates of Paradise, the next set of doors, which are going to be his great masterpiece and his legacy. He's going to work with his son on them and work for another, more or less, 20 years. So something's really different, though, and this is where it gives you chills because it's so cool. So here are the Gates of Paradise. He has gone full-blown from individual scenes with characters and architecture to full-blown storytelling. Have a look at how beautiful these panels are. Now, I'm going to take a look at one of these. Let's look at this one down here. This is a good one to start with because we're not just showing a snapshot of one scene in time. The Annunciation was a moment in time. This is trying to get more into actual storytelling, and this is a story you already know. This is the story of David and Goliath. You can tell because in the very far back of here, there's troops arriving. The battle's about to begin. Here, the battle is beginning, and you see Goliath arriving on a chariot. And then down below, you can see what happens to Goliath and his fate. You can see right here the young boy, David, who is chopping off Goliath's head with Goliath's own sword. So you see moments of a story all within one panel. Isn't that cool? So here's another one. This is even better, and let me see if I can zoom in. The best one, in my opinion, is at the top. So sorry, let me get into position here and see if I can zoom in. I'm going to zoom in way up here. Here we go. Okay. So this is the creation of man, the story of Adam and Eve. So if you look down in the very corner, here, very lower corner, that's Adam being created by God. If you look behind him, you'll see, in the middle of the panel here, you see Eve being drawn out of Adam's side. Behind Adam here at the very top, if you look above where Adam's being created, there's very lightly in the very background the scene of Adam and Eve having the apple off the tree of knowledge. And then if you look over in the corner, you can see them being ushered out of heaven. They're being thrown out of heaven and thrown up to the side. So the entire story of the creation, the temptation of Adam and Eve, and being thrown out of the Garden of Eden, all in one panel. And that's the genius. So for us, we look at this and say, this is cool. But for the people who lived at the time, this was like three-dimensional TV, 3D TV. This is like another level that they could have never imagined, seeing art that's storytelling, that's dynamic, and it's all in one panel. So these gates, being cast in bronze and covered in gold and facing the Duomo, were considered to be one of the greatest masterpieces of the Renaissance and are thereby called the Gates of Paradise. They say that it was Michelangelo who coined that term. He walked by and said they were fit to be the Gates of Paradise, but actually it comes from a different tradition also, that these were the gates you would pass through when you had been baptized. So I hope that shows you just real quickly, in lightning form, what it was to live in the Renaissance. It must have been a shocking time. It must have been jarring to see development happen so quick after so many years of nothing happening. And that's why the Renaissance is such an important part of history to understand, because it really changed. I mean, it's the beginning of the modern world. It's the beginning of understanding of art and science and technology and progress. I mean, progress is something that people hadn't seen in 1,000 years. So this is why it's important, and this is why it's important to come to Florence and to understand for yourself how money fuels progress, people. I mean, I think we all know that, but also fueling art and architecture. These are the legacies that we can leave. And I don't think anybody from the Renaissance would argue that they spent their money incorrectly. So the treasures of Florence Many of them are thanks to the Medici, not all, but a lot of them are. What I've just shown you right now was from the early Renaissance. The later Renaissance, that's going to be when the Medici are going to kind of take over the city, and they're going to become the primary family and the instigators of the flowering of this Renaissance. So what I've shown you in this little clip, this little walk here, is more a period that starts late 1200s with the beginning of the Duomo, going through early 1400s with the Orsanmichele and the doors of the Baptistry. So early Renaissance, it's the moment when things begin. What I showed you, talked about, the early Medici's, that's going to be mid 1400s, and then the later Medici, the one who is going to build the Uffizi, that's going to be in the 1500s, and Michelangelo also is at that time. So I hope that makes sense chronologically. If you want to know where these Medici lived, the later ones lived in Palazzo Pitti, but a lot of people don't know that the original Medicis lived here, right down the street from the Duomo in San Lorenzo. This is their palace. It's called the Palazzo Medici Riccardi. This is the very palace that Lorenzo the Magnificent lived in, and this is where Michelangelo lived as a child. It's a beautiful palace and has an incredible chapel by Benozzo Gozzoli. It's one of my favorite works of art. But, Florence is a small town. So that's where the Medicis lived and had their court. So, one more view of the Baptistry. If you saw my video of San Miniato the other day, Elisabetta had mentioned that that church, San Miniato, and the Baptistry come from about the same time period. So this decoration on the exterior doesn't match what's on the exterior of the Duomo because this is much more recent. This is the original, though. This is quite old. And it matches probably dates around the time of San Miniato, but the building itself could be as early as the 5th or 6th century AD at its bones. So it's kind of an interesting and mysterious building. You might wonder, why are there so many churches in Italy? Okay, they're Catholic. Okay, I get it. But one of the reasons there's so many churches in Italy is that when we have cities that are Roman in origin, think about how many temples that the Romans had to have, because they had this massive pantheon. They had hundreds and hundreds of gods, and you had to have a temple for each one, right? When Rome falls, what do you do with all these buildings? So what you do is you turn them all into churches. So that's why in Rome and in Florence and other places, often when you see a church, you have to wonder and you have to turn that little piece of curiosity on. Does this occur on the site of an ancient temple? And in this case, yes. So there was an ancient temple underneath this baptistry. At least they have some ruins that suggest that it was. So Florence is an interesting place, Florentia, named after the goddess of flowers. I could keep going, you guys, but honestly, I gotta have my dinner and sit down. I really wish that I had many, many days here. I do unfortunately have to go home eventually, and my son's birthday's this weekend. I would stick around and keep guiding and showing you guys around. Maybe I'll come back. We'll see. Maybe I'll try to come back in October or November and do some more virtual travel for you guys. But I hope that by experimenting this way, I hope you'll share what I'm doing and share my work, because I'm really hoping to start to open the door for guides all across Europe to share their love of art and history, because we miss this, you guys. We miss our work. I love what I do. I'm passionate about it, and I miss you. I miss you being here with me so I can do it in person. So please share my work, tell people about virtual tours, help to employ us, but also this is a way for us to connect across the world when it's not possible. And maybe we'll build an infrastructure that in the future, people who are disabled or unable to travel themselves, they can still feel like they're a part of the travel world. So maybe we're building an infrastructure for a brighter future. I'm an optimist, so everything happens for a reason, I think. Meeting the Pope happened for a reason. Pandemics happen for a reason. So let's take some comfort in that maybe what's going to happen is travel is going to be much better after this event, okay? So thank you so much for watching tonight, everybody. I hope you enjoyed my little walk. If you haven't seen the other parts, there's 2 other parts to this. And tomorrow, I have 2 very exciting things coming up. My friend Roberto Becchi and I are going to go to a vendemmia, which is a grape harvest. I'm going to go out to Roberto's farm, and I'm going to actually pick grapes, which is very exciting. And then later in the day, I'm heading up to Venice, and I'm going to check out the city of Venice and give you a few little tours around. Monday, I'm going to be doing a special event just for Patreon supporters only, so look for a Patreon code. I'm going to do a special Patreon only food tour. I'm going to go get some cicchetti, and I'm going to share with my Patreon supporters all of the best stuff that you can eat in Venice. Okay, so thanks again everybody for tuning in. Ciao for today. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Ci vediamo domani e grazie per tutto. Ciao ciao.